There are too many questionable facts surrounding Jeffrey Epstein's death to just accept it was a suicide and not a murder. There were too many people in high positions who were afraid Epstein might sing like a canary. On August 10, 2019, American financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his Metropolitan Correctional Center prison cell, where he had been awaiting trial on fresh underage girls' sex trafficking charges. As stated by the Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Prisons official announcement, he had been hauled to an area hospital for treatment for life-threatening traumas and then pronounced dead by hospital personnel. The New York City medical examiner oversaw the handling of Epstein's death, who ruled it a suicide. Epstein's attorneys challenged that decision and started their own evaluation. Epstein's brother Mark hired Michael Barden to manage the autopsy. In late October, Barden announced that autopsy proof was more indicative of homicidal strangulation than hanging. The FBI, along with also the U.S. Department of Justice's Inspector General, is conducting investigations into the circumstances of his passing. The guards on duty were later charged with conspiracy theories and document falsification. Because of violations of prison processes at the night of his passing, and Epstein's extensive knowledge of endangering information about powerful men and women, his supposed suicide has turned into speculation supported by facts that he had been murdered. Not to mention, he may have been privy to information about other criminal activity by others so commonly found present with illegal sexual practices with underage girls. And there are so many other factors that make Epstein's death suspect of foul play. Why would a prison warden assign 2 guards who were working overtime to such a high-profile prisoner? This makes them falling asleep explainable to law enforcement. And why was he taken off suicide watch when he had tried to commit suicide before? And he had no cellmate, which was the usual practice in this prison. We know prison officials can be corrupt, and would be motivated by large sums of money to carry out actions that would make Epstein's death look like suicide and actually be just a cover-up for a carefully planned and executed murder. People with extreme power and influence have a long reach and are in a position to intimidate people to follow their wishes as well as appeal to the sense of greed so they would look the other way or become their henchmen. These are the kind of people who may have had a lot to gain from permanently keeping Epstein quiet. Even President Trump has jumped on the bandwagon claiming that the Clintons are tied to Epstein's death, all the while downplaying his own relationship with Epstein. The 2 New Yorkers were buddies through the 1990s, and into the 2000s, and in a minimum of 1 instance, were captured on camera ogling girls together at Mar-a-Lago, Mr. Trump's Palm Beach, Florida property. The origin of their eventual falling out, that Mr. Trump has highlighted over the friendship itself, has been in dispute. The same connections that Jeffrey Epstein had used to get a sweetheart deal on his first sentencing for sexually abusing a 14-year-old girl in Florida ironically were the same people who ordered him to be murdered, if indeed he was murdered. In 2005, Epstein pleaded guilty to the charges of pleaded guilty to hiring an underage girl for prostitution and soliciting a prostitute and spent 13 months in so-called custody, where he spent most of his time unsupervised and was allowed to go to his office driven by a limo. In fact, this was just the tip of the iceberg of Epstein's wrongdoing. Federal officials had identified 36 underage girls whom Epstein had abused sexually. The origin of their eventual falling out, that Mr. Trump has highlighted over the friendship itself, has been in dispute. The same connections that Jeffrey Epstein had used to get a sweetheart deal on his first sentencing for sexually abusing a 14-year-old girl in Florida ironically were the same people who ordered him to be murdered, if indeed he was murdered. In 2005, Epstein pleaded guilty to the charges of pleaded guilty to hiring an underage girl for prostitution and soliciting a prostitute and spent 13 months in so-called custody, where he spent most of his time unsupervised and was allowed to go to his office driven by a limo. In fact, this was just the tip of the iceberg of Epstein's wrongdoing. Federal officials had identified 36 underage girls whom Epstein had abused sexually. So the question remains, if we believe that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, will the detectives on the case be able to find the people responsible? Most likely not. It may be possible to find out who actually carried out the murder, but to find the people who ordered the hit will practically be impossible. The detectives will run into people who will not be willing to talk, or have been threatened or paid off to send any investigation off track. In the end, they will file the paperwork, perhaps finding the man who did the actual strangulation, but it will end there. Everything else will be a dead end. If we look far into our history, to find cover-ups that have been so extensive that guilty parties have not been exposed and convicted. In the case of John Kennedy, conspiracy theories still abound, because we have nothing from law enforcement to explain it differently. For such significant events in our lives, we want an explanation, so we are left to concoct what we believe are reasonable theories. If you watch the movie, 3 Days of the Condor, with Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway, we see how this situation evolves. In this movie, Redford is a CIA researcher who finds all of his associates have been murdered. He goes underground and searches for someone he can trust. In the end, he comes face to face with a man who has orders to assassinate him, and they have an enlightening conversation. The man leaves him with a thought: one day you will be walking, and a car will pull up and ask you to get in, and the movie ends with no further explanation. This same principle is in operation in our society today, whether we like it or not. There are things that law enforcement and the public will never know. Investigations into the matter will lead to nowhere. The people who are in power have the ability to make things appear the way they want it to through their money and power. And we are left trying to make sense of it. So this is why we make videos like this, to try and make sense of events in our lives that have no other reasonable explanation. We create conspiracy theories. This is our way of dealing with being left out of the loop. Out of the loop. Somehow creating these conspiracy theories gives us a sense of power and closure on very disturbing events in our society.
It has never been a conspiracy in this country.